Okay, it seems we are live now.
Great.
Ankit, you can hear me, right?
Yes, I can hear you. Can
Cool.
everyone hear me?
I think it's just the two of us here on Zoom.
Okay.
Everybody else
Yeah.
is joining us from elsewhere, from YouTube, I guess. So we'll
Yeah.
get started. So, hi everyone. This is today we are going to have a conversation with Ankit from Clear. Ankit is the co-founder and CTO of Clear. And this event is a part of the FP on the web conference that's going to happen later this year. Um, Today, we're going to have an informal conversation with Ankit about his experience in using functional programming and specifically F Sharp in production. Um, I'm BG. I'm also a programmer and co-founder and CTO of Team Ohana, and have been a part of the FP community for a while, and we have known each other for a while as well. But this is the first time that we are talking
Yeah.
in public. I think Anupam also just joined. Anupam, are you here?
Yeah.
Hi,
Hi,
Anupam.
yes, I'm here.
So Anupam, you are the host. So maybe you can say some few remarks to start the conversation, and then we'll take it forward from here.
Sure. First, I'll apologize for being a minute late. It's
No worries.
so, I'm welcome everyone. This is another exciting session in FP WebConf. So, I'll just talk about in brief about what's the idea behind this conference. So, this conference, it's basically an attempt to bring insights from industry professionals, especially insights about functional programming, to everyone. And as a part of this, we are organizing these sessions with people who have experience using functional programming in production. So we have a great talk scheduled today, which is another in the same series. It's functional programming in production at Clear. This entire series is organized under the umbrella of JSFoo. JSFoo is one of the oldest JavaScript programming communities in India, and it's also a platform for 365 days conversations around web and mobile development. So it's being organized under that umbrella, and we are basically. I'm the chief organizer of a community called Functional Programming India, which is also a partner of this FP WebConf, and that is also a platform for people, functional programming enthusiasts from across India, to come and discuss their ideas, exchange notes about how they're doing things. And we have a bunch of different channels for people to participate in. So if you're interested in functional programming, and I assume that if you're on this conference, then please join some of our other channels. Primarily being there's a Telegram community for FP India, which I'll drop the link to in chat. So please join that. And I'd also like to say that this is our second online talk that has been organized as a part of FP WebConf. But going forward, we'll have more. We'll have monthly events and also in-person events, because I think that's very important to organize. So coming up next is an event at Bangalore at JustPay, which is going to be on 17th of June. Then there's the upcoming FP India Delhi meetup that's going to be on 24th of June. So if you're interested in attending any of those meetups, then please join us. And especially if you would like to speak also, we are looking for speakers. If you have experiences to share, then please get in touch with us as well. So I'd like to introduce our speakers tonight. So this is a conversation with Ankit Solanki, who is co-founder at Clear, and he'll be talking about his experiences adopting F# into the organization, and how it's been working out. So moderating this session is going to be Baishampayan Ghose, who's popularly known as BG, and he's been an active member of the functional programming community in India. He was on the editorial teams for Enclosure and Functional Conf, and he's formerly CTO of HelpShift, and now he's running the Team Ohana. So just one more note before we start, which is If you're watching this on Zoom, then please feel free to ask any questions and comments, or use the raise hand button. Or if you're watching on YouTube, then you can visit the event page on Hasgeek and then just put your comments there.
I will be needing your help there, Anupam. So if there are any questions on YouTube, please maybe copy and paste them on the chat here on Zoom. That would be helpful for us.
Yes, I will.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anupam.
Thanks, Anupam.
Thanks, Anupam, for being our host and creating a community for functional programmers in India. Functional programming, as it is a pretty niche sort of field. There aren't many people practicing it, and it's good to have a forum where we can talk about FP and share our experiences. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Anupam.
Cool, Ankit. So let's get started. Maybe, to begin with, you can give us a little bit of an intro about your background,
Sure.
what you do, and let's not talk too much about F# because we will be talking
Yes, we'll be coming to
in depth about it subsequently.
Right. Hey, everyone. I'm Ankit. I'm one of the co-founders at Clear. You might know us as Cleartax. And Cleartax has been our company name for a while. We recently sort of rebranded the parent company to Clear. But don't worry, our consumer tax platform is still called Cleartax. I think everyone remembers that name. I've been with Archit, Srivatsan, my co-founders. We've been running Clear since 10 years now. So it's been a very long journey. And doing startups for 10 years, it definitely shows you every stage of a life cycle of a company. For the first 3 years or so, we were pretty much self-funded. We were staying at Archit's house. We were staying in the living room and working out of home, almost like a garage style startup. Then we got funding from Y Combinator. I think we were one of the earliest companies to get funding from Y Combinator. And over time, we have grown as a company. We have gone from our single income tax filing product to a suite of B2B products as well around GST compliances and so on. If anyone has any, our journey has, I think, been very atypical. I don't think it is a very standard journey, but I think every startup's journey is unique. Looking forward to this conversation. And if anyone has any questions or anything, please feel free to ask on the chat or on YouTube, or you can directly reach out to me as well after the meetup and we can have a conversation.
Sure.
And sorry, I personally was sort of the co-founder who was mostly looking after the technology side. So for the longest time, I was coding basically. I think I still try to touch a little bit of code here and there whenever I can. That's about me.
Awesome. Thanks, Ankit. I think Clear and Cleartax is a fantastic product. I'm personally a user, so definitely.
Thanks. It's always good to hear that.
Kudos to you guys for building a very good product with great user experience. So
definitely, if you try to use it this year, just reach out to me with feedback also. It's always good to get very detailed feedback from a fellow co-founder.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's start from the very beginning. So you said that you guys were hacking the product from the living rooms of your house, right? So how did you get interested in FP to begin with? Why did you think FP is something worth looking at? I mean, there are many technologies. Why FP?
Correct. I think we were young. We were very enthusiastic. We were a technical bunch of people. So I personally have been a fan of languages like Lisp. I've been a user of Emacs, for example, for the last 15 years. And I would try to go through that famous book, Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs, at some point in time. And I think that was also the early sort of 2010s and so on, around the time when, for example, Paul Graham used to write a lot about Lisp and languages like that. Clojure, I think, was just getting started around that time as well. So at least being a very curious person, I was always looking for what can I learn, what can I look at, and I was very inclined to look at functional languages. But again, at that point, I didn't really have any examples of people really using them. It was more academic in nature and just to play around with, learn new concepts, learn new paradigms.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, from my experience also, I would say that early on, Paul Graham was definitely a big inspiration. SICP is also
Yes.
a book that influenced me a lot. It was sort of my gateway to FP and Lisp as well. But I mean, when people think about functional programming, at least if we go back to, let's say, early 2010,
Yes.
when people were talking about functional programming languages, they would have probably thought about maybe Lisp or maybe Haskell, right? Even Scala was very, very new back then. But why F sharp? How did you get attracted towards?
So that's a interesting story. Cleartax, our tax filing product, is basically on the .NET technology stack. So when we started, like long time back, one of the thoughts we had was that we might need to do a desktop software. I think, like for example, QuickBooks or TurboTax in US is also has a desktop app. I'm not sure if they still have it, but they used to have a desktop app at that point in time as well. So our thought process very early on was that we might need to do desktop because we didn't know there was no income tax filing platform on the web at that point in time. It was a very we didn't know if people would be comfortable filing taxes on browsers or and so on. And if you want to do something desktop, I think today we have Electron and you can use the web technologies and so on. I think again that was not present at that point in time. So you would basically think about you build a Java application which is cross-platform, or you use a C# and build a native
Windows.forms.
Exactly, and I think at least for us, our target audience would be Windows because like almost 99% of our users would be on Windows at that point in time. So that's how we were on the .NET stack, and we never sort of ended up doing desktop apps. We realized quickly that okay, the web is a great place to be in, and you can just build a great experience on the web. But at that time also, as we started using C# and we were on the .NET ecosystem, we realized that C# itself is a nice language. Like we have already built this. Now there is no point in rewriting it and just because or choosing to use other languages. So we continued to be on C#. And Cleartax still is a platform built on the .NET stack. So we were on the .NET stack, and at that, like we were just like exploring, looking at what's happening in the .NET ecosystem, and we just came upon F#. Like it's a project by Microsoft Research. We started looking at some tutorials and so on. It was just like just exploring to see what else can we do in this sandbox. And yeah, I think the first few times I just played around, like I did some Hello World examples and so on. I was pretty much sold on the language. The language is a great language. I think the first time I understood, like, okay, F# has a feature called pipelines, where you can, just like on a Unix command line, you can run a command and pipe it to another command. F# in the F# language has a native support for a pipelining operator, where you can pass the results of one function to another function using a very natural syntax. And I don't think there is any language, any other language right now which has the same thing as ergonomically designed as F#. And I think like the first few things I learned about the language, I was just sold on it. That okay, this is a great language to use. And this is okay around 2014 or 2015, I would say. And I was just exploring around the language. And at that point also, we didn't really have a concept of taking risk or it's a non-standard technology call. We were like a small team, 4 or 5 people as founders writing code most of the time. We didn't really think about the implications of a choice around using F# as a language. Okay, we like it. Okay, let's use the language if you like it, and that's pretty much how we started using it. We didn't start using F# in our income tax filing platform. So along with our tax filing platform, we have built a bunch of other products, like some products for professionals, like chartered accountants and tax return preparers. At that time also, we had a very early plan of building a TDS platform. So every time you get a salary, you get some tax deducted on that salary, and your employer has to deduct this tax and deposit it with the government. And there is a specific, just like you file your income tax return, there is a whole sort of compliance that the employer has to do every month, every quarter to file the TDS returns and submit it to the government. So we were at the early stages of planning our TDS platform, and that's where we saw the F# language, and we decided, okay, let's just build the TDS platform in F# language itself.
What about the front end, the web part? Was that in from somehow in .NET or F# as well?
So the front end was plain sort of HTML, JavaScript. It was actually a very traditional MVC oriented application where you have a backend which is doing some business logic, rendering a view, and so on. So I think they're used to like Fable and so on. I'm not sure if it existed around 2014, 2015, which is I think the current F# way to do front ends. React and so on, React Angular also were very new at that point.
No chance.
So this was a very typical server-ended application. You have backend business logic, which is rendering HTML and serving to the front end at that point in time.
Got it. So, but you said that you really loved F#, the language.
Yes.
Pipelining is something that you talked about.
Yes.
What do you think are the kind of the pillars of functional programming? Like a lot of people talk about FP all the time, right? But I guess everybody sees FP as a slightly different thing, right? What is your point of view about that?
So again, I think, as you said, that there can be many different ways you can call something functional. Like you might say that JavaScript was also functional because you can have functions as a first-class citizen, and you can pass functions to functions, create functions that have functions that create other functions, and so on. So a function is a value, and it can be created at runtime as well. I think that is a bare bones that is required. But today, I think most languages, whether you are talking about Java or any other language, most languages now have functions as a first-class primitive. This wasn't the case 5-10 years ago. But functional programming comes with its own sort of mindset, at least for me. So I think of it more in whether it is a static language like F# or Haskell, or whether it is a dynamic language like Lisp, Clojure, and so on. I think focus on like writing simple side effect free code, simple functions, bottom up modeling, immutable data, and so on. So like these sort of concepts getting fit together into a functional approach to solving problems. Now you might have specific language features like abstract data types or higher order types, or like if you go to Haskell, there can be hundreds of different things you can talk about. So there might be a lot of mathematical concepts also involved with it. But for me, I think the basics of a functional programming language is the very basics. I think if you can do that much, like you can think about things in terms of pure functions without mutating global state, if you can sort of think about values as immutable and try to sort of do bottom-up modeling of things instead of like very top-down class structure or some rigid organization of code. I think that's at least how I would, what I would call as a functional language to start with. And then you can go, that's I think the starting point, and you can choose to go in any further direction, depending on how you want to explore the landscape.
Right. So taking a little bit of a detour here, what you said makes complete sense, by the way. But then that raises another question, that are these language features or are these conventions that I can, apply to any programming language today? What are your thoughts about that?
So I think the answer will be a little muddy in this sense. I've gone back and forth over my career. So something being a language feature is great in the sense that, for example, if you are doing Java and there are these design patterns in Java language that a lot of people might want to follow, right? And often the design patterns are designed because something is not natively possible in a language, but you can apply a pattern on top of the language to have a certain whatever concept. Like if a language doesn't have a built-in concept of an iterator, you can still build an iterator yourself. But if there is a syntactic sugar for it, or if it is a built-in part of the language itself, it is much more ergonomic and much more readable, because everyone who uses the language understands the feature which is part of the language. So
It's like a first class concept.
yes. So if
right?
it's something is built into the language, that means the language is designed to support that. Like you can write immutable code using JavaScript also, but if JavaScript's built-in types are not immutable, then you have to go the extra step and put some wrappers on top, or take care of uh, making sure you are not doing side effects or something.
Right.
So it's, I think what is fundamentally, languages are Turing complete. You can probably do anything in any language, but it's the what is available to you out of the box. What is something that the language recommends you to go towards? What are the best practices of the language? And some capabilities, if they are not part of the language, they are just too verbose to do yourself. Like if you go to pattern matching in the language, then you'll be writing a lot of if-else condition manually, and maybe you might end up solving the problem in a different manner. In a functional language with pattern matching, you might have a simple tabular sort of piece of code which you can just write. In some other languages, you might have a more complex code which does the same thing, but it is more geared towards that language's features.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you made some really good points here. And also, I think the key point that you raised here is that first class support of certain features in a language, it sort of defines how you're going to think about solving your problem, right?
Yes.
Like if pattern matching is not available, of course, I will use if then else or something similar to that. But if pattern matching is a first class function, is a first class feature of my language, for example, in Erlang, pattern matching is the way of doing things.
Yes.
You don't write code any other way, right?
Right.
So, and that defines how you also think about solving problems. And it's not a matter of convention anymore. That is the way, right? And I guess it also helps with collaboration in an organization. Like if everybody is writing code in the same way, it definitely helps, right? Because I know a lot of people who back in the day tried to do functional programming in Java, and their co-workers hated them.
Yeah.
Because they could not read that code or contribute to that code base. So
that is interestingly a problem with F# as well. F# is multi-paradigm. You can do object-oriented code, you can do imperative code, you can do functional code. I think language guides you towards a functional path, but if you are, let's say, a new programmer on F# and you are familiar with like classes and so on, you can write classes and you can continue doing that. And so it's both a strength and a weakness. Like just like TypeScript also, let's say TypeScript is on top of JavaScript, it can do a bunch of things, but it doesn't have a single way of doing it. It has both all the options on the table, which is both again a strength and a weakness, because everyone might be exposed to different concepts and they might use the different way of doing things. So in a team, it's not very cohesive if like different people have different exposures.
Right.
Everyone might have their own way to solve the same problem.
Yeah, I think that comes back to the whole point of a language being opinionated, right?
Yes, I think Tushar on chat mentioned that it's a double-edged sword to give multiple options.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like being a purist also sometimes is a problem. Like TypeScript is successful because it is on top of JavaScript and it is not a pure language. It is a very pragmatic language.
Right.
So, yeah.
I mean, being a successful language is also important, right? And
Yes.
certain important decisions do take a part in deciding whether a language will be successful or not. And being flexible is definitely important. But I mean, I would kind of belong to the other side of the camp here. I would say that it is important to be opinionated for a programming language. It may not be the only way supported by the language, but there has to be one canonical way of writing code. Otherwise, it's a free for all, right?
Yes.
Like I can take an example of Scala, for example. Like Scala has everything, right? You can write code which looks exactly like Java to something that just looks like category theory and mathematics and nothing else, right? So there's a whole spectrum of how you can write code. But when it comes to collaboration and working in a production setting, coding standards, collaboration, ability for everybody in the team to contribute to the code base is also super important, right? So,
Yeah.
did you face any problems then with when you started? You were probably the only programmer writing F sharp, and then you hired more people, or other people started contributing. How did you get about training them to begin with?
So yeah, like when I started, I was only programmer writing. One second.
I think we have
I
already
think there's
answered this
a
question.
yeah. So yeah, when we started, I think I was the only programmer writing F sharp. I was building the first version of this TDS platform, and uh, so one of the other reasons we chose F sharp was that the TDS compliance, when you generate a TDS return, there is like a very complex flat file format that has to be generated or passed and so on. And I saw that F sharp is making it simpler for me to write the parsers for that specific module. So my actually goal was to just write the low level return generation and parser and generator code in F sharp and write the rest of it in C. But as I started writing that, and I was immediately very productive, even though I just had like the bare bones understanding of our language, I was immediately very productive and I was able to move very fast. So I just ended up like writing the all the business logic, most of the stack in F sharp. So initially it was just like it's almost like a state of flow. I was able to make a lot of progress. I was happy, and then we had I think a few interns at that point in time, and like okay, like people who are fresh out of college or who are very young don't really have any preconceived notions. They've never really done anything else. So either whether you teach them a functional language as the first language or something else, it won't make a huge difference. And it was not a big sort of blocker for us. As we started to hire people for this team and started to get people on this product, that's when we actually ran into problems. I think there are two levels of problems we have, especially for F sharp, which is that first you are on the .NET stack, which is again like a minority stack just in the people. I think now it's maybe perception is different because it is a very cross-platform stack with like pretty good cooling across all platforms. Back then, you used to need Windows and you needed Visual Studio and so on to be able to write .NET code, C# code, and so on. So that was one first level. That okay, you have a problem of getting people to be sold on the .NET stack. Second, you have to teach people functional programming and functional languages. We definitely didn't find anyone who was already doing this. So we were trying to hire people and convincing them to switch to this track. And at least the types of people who come to a very early stage startup, like a startup who has like no funding or like very basic funding and just want to contribute. I think it is not a very tough sell. Like you can convince people on that. As we grew as a company and we had to start to expand the team, it became progressively more and more difficult because let's say you are getting a senior engineer, they might have spent 4 years working on, let's say, a JVM stack. Now you tell them that, okay, I would want you to switch your tech stacks and go into this platform and learn a new language and contribute. It's a tough sell. Like, there are people who agree to do that, but sometimes it's everyone also looks out for their own sort of career projection, progression, and their own resumes. And yeah, like it's over time, it became more and more difficult to sort of find people to staff in this role, staff for this product specifically. I think at one point, again, this is very early. I'm not sure if anyone else who is starting a company now probably will have a different experience and so on. I think functional programming is much more mainstream, and functional ideas are part of many mainstream languages. But I think at one point I probably like did a GitHub scrape and like figured out any person who has done any random piece of code in F sharp or Haskell in India and had reached out to them on email or something to see if they were interested. Also, like we tried. I think I did a bunch of things we set up like a F# user group in Bangalore. We tried to do meetups. I spoke in a few conferences, tried to sort of,
Right.
I think there was a functional conference and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. I tried to sort of go to a conference tour and meet people and sell them on the language. Again, it's not impossible, but it's hard. And it's a uphill struggle, definitely.
Absolutely. I think you have raised some very important points, and I completely agree with that because my personal experience has exactly been the same. The thing is, you mentioned curiosity as a very important thing for you, right? You were very curious and you were looking out for different tools and technologies and always were thinking about being better as a programmer or a software
Yes.
engineer, right? Do you think that curiosity is sort of not common enough in the general population? Do you think engineers need to be a little bit more curious?
If you had asked me this question 5 years ago, I would probably say yes, that okay, people are not curious enough or they just don't want to learn or something. I would sort of realize that software engineering, writing code, I think everyone doesn't go into software engineering just because they love writing code. I think there is definitely a segment of audience who enjoys programming, enjoys writing code, wants to learn everything about it. They want, but I think that is a very small minority. And I think maybe some years ago, I would have sort of complained about that. People are not really in this for the art, they are in this for the money. But I sort of realized that, okay, like fundamentally everything is a job. You do things to be sort of like a breadwinner for your family, right? Everyone doesn't always do the things they love, right? So like, I think for me, the realization came when I had to stop writing code day to day and sort of step into more of a management role. Then I realized that, okay, you can't be doing only what you like every time, right?
Right.
So I think if it's a career and people will be rational and figure out what is the investment they need to make to improve their career fundamentally. If functional programming is a way to fast track their career or get a better job opportunity, I think people would self-select that. But I don't think that is the case today. Like, I don't think just having exposure to functional programming, it definitely makes you a better programmer because the more exposed you are, the better you sort of are able to approach a problem in any language. But it is not like one thing you can do to improve your odds or whatever in being a better programmer or growing faster.
Right. So, I mean, if I have to paraphrase what you said, I think you gave a very mature response, and even there, I would agree with you. So, I believe that definitely in the long term, exposure to functional programming definitely makes you a better programmer. It doesn't matter which programming language you use, but it is also a reality that engineers or job seekers may not have that long-term perspective. Maybe they are just looking for getting a job today. And of course, there are more jobs in more mainstream technologies, right? So that's there. Great. So, okay, so you said that you brought in a team and you coached them, trained them. Most of them were freshers. There were initially no problems. What were some of the lessons that you sort of learned from using F# in production? Because see, production requirements are very different, right?
Yes.
Like anybody can learn any programming language in a weekend, maybe, and solve a lot of toy problems. But when we are thinking about running something in production, there are so many other boring things that we have to worry about.
Yes.
Right. Is there anything that you can share with us?
So definitely, like what we realized is that keeping things simple, like since you can go deep into F# as a language and you can go into some category theory type approaches, you can go into like monads and so on. But I think what we learned is that keeping things simple and trying to sort of be bare bones is often better than trying or the most elegant way to do things. because it is more important for someone to be able to read and understand the code who might not be as deep into that language as the person writing. For example, F# has a great type system, but you don't have to explicitly write the types. Like you don't have to annotate the code. It will infer the types automatically, just like Haskell. But then we realize that, okay, it's better for readability if you actually allocate the types yourself instead of letting the IDE auto-complete for you. Because when you're doing a pull request and you're looking at a piece of code on GitHub,
to read and understand.
Better to have that context in that environment, because GitHub PR won't show you the IDE tooltips and so on. There were language features, like I think F# has a feature called quotations, code quotations, which is like if you put like a special, like just like I think in this, if you escape your list and so on, you can create a parse tree. So F# has a feature which is
like a macro for building macros.
Correct, but it's not a macro. You can write an expression inside a piece of code, and instead of that expression being compiled into the language, it would basically be an expression tree at that point in time, and you can later on look at that expression tree and parse it. I think it's a very interesting feature. You can do things like you can write an expression which is like a lambda function on top of a type, and by iterating over that expression, you can generate a SQL query dynamically, which is equivalent, and run that query on a database. You can do a bunch of interesting things there. But we realize that quotations are especially expensive. From one piece of code I wrote using quotations and one piece of code I wrote, same thing I wrote in a more sort of live manner. There was like 100x difference in the timing it took, because quotations don't get optimized by the compiler. They'll be treated as a tree at runtime, and then you have to do a full recursive approach to pass through that tree. So if you are doing it in the hot code path, like you are trying to do like it in a parser layer or a generator layer where you are going over something, each line of a return, it doesn't make sense to use that fancy feature. Just better write more lines of code and keep it more explicit, but it is more performant. So yeah, it's just shipping things to production and getting it used makes a big difference. And I think
we will get there. We'll get to these comments over the course of our conversation.
Sorry, I just get distracted. I have OCD. If I see 100, I ended up looking at it. So those were some of the interesting lessons, like keeping it simple. Don't go into the weeds of the language. Make it readable. Even if the compiler can do some magic, better to make it very explicit and something that you can easily read. Annotate the type on the code base just for the reader of the code instead of for the writer and so on. I think, as the saying goes, that the person who is going to debug your code is probably going to be
madman.
You yourself are going to be like even if you are the debugger, you won't understand what you've written 6 months later. So it's make it easy for the person who is debugging something, I think.
And also you mentioned, you talked about runtime performance of these features, right? So all these features, they may seem very cool when I'm solving small problems, right? But in runtime, in production environment, we don't really have that visibility all the time to know how it's going to perform under production load. Right?
One very other interesting example, I mentioned pipelines as one of the great features of the language, right? And I still think that, like, it's a killer feature. But okay, at one point I had a piece of code which was like 10 levels deep pipeline. Like you have function 1, function 2, function 3. It's being pipelined through 10 lines. Now there was an exception somewhere, there is a stack trace. But it's very difficult to figure out what has happened, because actually for the compiler it is 1 line of code. And it will give you a stack trace which is very hard to read. Then you realize, okay, better to put intermediate variables, at least you know where the stack trace is operating and so on. So sometimes it feels magical, but then you realize that for maintenance purpose, it might be better to be very explicit.
Functional programming languages, many of them, at least Clojure for some point, for some time, people used to complain a lot about unreadable stack traces. So the thing is, this is something beyond just designing a programming language, right? It's like designing the runtime and tooling around it so that we can debug code better. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that it takes a tremendous amount of engineering work to create readable stack traces. Like if you look at the Rust project today, these people take pride in doing a lot of work so that, the error message, if my code doesn't compile, the compiler error message will exactly point out to the, not just the line of code, but maybe also the column of the code where the error happened. And
it's an art really to how.
And especially when we talk about functional languages, a lot of code actually gets generated by the compiler. So the code that is generated and executed is not exactly the same as what you have written. So many times it is extremely difficult to debug the problems. So then what happened then? Okay, go on.
So okay, like, as I said that hiding was a tough challenge. So there are few reasons for which we didn't really increase our adoption of F#. I think some of these are specific to F#. Maybe let's say if you're using Clojure or some other language, it might have been a different thing. But I mentioned that we were using it in our TDS platform, and at least the intent originally was that we'll start incorporating more and more F# into our income tax filing platform as well. But I think one of the decisions that again Microsoft made was to not make it very easy to like gradually incorporate F# code into a C# project. Like roughly you are able to just do at a very high level of granularity. You can either have a project in C# language or F# language. You can't mix, and so that made it like very difficult for us to incrementally adopt or start putting some core pieces of code into F#. F# specific being on .NET, as I said, is another thing that caused problems at the beginning. Also, like when we tried to hire people who were into functional programming, I think F# is a much smaller community than even languages like Clojure or Haskell and Scala and so on. So there used to be that disconnect also, that okay, if you hire someone who is very enthusiastic and does Haskell exercises or whatever on the side, they might end up coming and trying to do some F# code and realize that okay, 90% of all the advanced things that I'm learning about is not something I'll be writing in my day job, because we will encourage you to keep things simple. And if you want to learn Haskell because you want to go into category theory, suddenly you would think that writing F# would be an ideal day job, but then you realize that the dreams and reality don't meet, and it's not the same. And then they would have a period of disillusionment, and that used to be like similarly, I think. So it was a tough set in some cases. Like sometimes we were able to hire people or get some consultants to do something, but people who are into functional programming or were just looking at it from a purist perspective would not like to do something which is like a practical or a compromise. That okay, you can get some functional features, but do something so that like we can move faster. And people who are coming in from a very pragmatic perspective would ask, hey, why are you doing this? Just do something simpler, no, and so on. So that's
very difficult to strike a middle path.
That middle path actually sort of killed it. Like if we were all in, maybe like we were decided full company is being written in F#, that may have been a different thing. But we were very pragmatic also. Like when we, for example, started to build our B2B platforms, our GST return filing platforms and e-invoicing and so on, we didn't say that, okay, just because we have C# XP tech stack over here, we should build everything in C#. We realized that the market, for example, is much more inclined towards JVM, Java Stack, Java language. That's what we are able to hire for and get senior people from other startups who are on the JVM stack as well. So we were very pragmatic and said that, okay, let's new product, new platform. Let's build it with whatever we can, whoever we can hire, who are the most experienced. So we were pragmatic in that sense, and we were never like all in into the language saying, okay, let's do everything in F#. I think that's pretty much when, like, if you were not fully committed to the language and there was no gradual path to adopt it, it sort of just became isolated. That okay, one product is there, but the rest of it is F# is not touching the rest of the ecosystem of our products, and that's how sort of it gradually died.
Yeah, so I agree. So it is sort of a paradigm shift, right? Because not only is your language changing, all the tooling around is changing. The libraries that you are using, they are going to change. The runtime environment is going to change. Your ID is going to change. And definitely it can be an uphill task, if you are not all in. But going all in also may mean
Yes.
going to another end of the extreme
Yes.
when you are writing code in a way that very few people will probably understand, right? That also happens, especially in ML family of languages like Pascal and F sharp. But you have written C sharp as well as F sharp now, right? And do you think your F sharp code was better than your C sharp code, or in any, how do you compare in terms of?
So I feel F sharp code, like again, like it's a personal bias, but yeah, I would like it is more pleasant. I would not call it better, but it is more pleasant to write and more pleasant to read.
Absolutely. Like we as professional programmers, we don't talk much about the joy of programming,
Yes.
right? And do you think it is important aspect of being a professional that, I should be in an environment where at least I'm getting some
Again,
fun?
like as long as not everyone will have that, but if you enjoy programming, then you owe it to yourself to get exposed to as many styles, as many languages, because
Mm,
even maybe if you are not using everything in your day job, it is our art, right? It is how we are sort of impacting the world. So at least for me, it is very important that I should be able to enjoy the day job also.
awesome. Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. There should be some joy. Otherwise,
Yes.
it's difficult to be creative.
And you can, at least if you are curious and have an open mind, you can enjoy anything. Like I like
Mm.
writing Java also at times. Like
Yeah, absolutely.
sometimes I hate writing Java, sometimes I like writing Java because depends on the mindset, depends on how I approach
Mm.
it at any given point in time. Uh, the language sometimes gets in your way, sometimes it makes your path clear.
Mm.
So depending on the day, with F sharp also, I might have a day where I'm really struggling because I need to do something and I'm fighting against the language.
Language.
And opposite might happen with Java or TypeScript.
Yeah, true, true, true. So, to continue your experience at Clear, so the end story here is that ultimately you guys decided to rewrite your F sharp code in Java. Please
Yes.
tell us something about that experience. How did you even approach this problem? Because rewriting existing code bases, large code bases into another language is anyway fraught with a lot of risk, right? What did you guys do to alleviate that risk?
So again, it's a difficult decision, but also like the TDS platform is just one part of our
Yeah,
ecosystem. Like we as a company are doing income tax as well as GST,
GST.
e-invoicing, lot of B2B software, lot of B2C software, and so on. So it's a large ecosystem in our company. And the TDS product was just one part of it, which probably had like a small team attached to it. By lines of code, also it might have been like a very small
Yeah, F
service
sharp.
compared to a lot of our ecosystem, right? So it was a matter of figuring out the right time and putting in the right investment. Like we have to dedicate a team on this. We have to sort of make a call that okay, we'll put a team behind it. The team is going to spend 6 months rewriting something. It's going to come up as a rewritten product with the same capabilities, or maybe slightly better because now we have better idea about what we're trying to do. So architecturally, it might have a better architecture and so on. But it was a cost investment, purely sort of a business investment, where you decide that okay, we'll put resources behind it. They'll be doing this, nothing else. So no new features would ship for that 6 months, let's say,
Right.
because they're busy rewriting.
So are you guys still on both the .NET and the JVM
No,
platform? There is no .NET.
For no, okay. For for the TDS platform, we have really connected. Our income tax platform is we are happily on the .NET platform. It is a great piece of tech. It works. It continues to scale. It is still we can make a lot of investments year over year because it is not a static piece of code that we finished our income tax platform and we are happy. Right. Every year we improve our product and we make it deeper, we make it richer. So
And that
we
is in
always
C
keep
sharp,
making
right?
progress. Yes.
So you guys, your Clear today is a Java and a C# company, right?
Yes, yes.
Primarily.
And bunch of like Python as well,
Yeah.
because a lot of data, especially a lot of our
Yes.
platform side Python is the front end, of course, is TypeScript,
JavaScript.
JavaScript.
When you guys rewrote the F# service into Java, or maybe all the new Java code that you guys wrote, did your F# experience influence that in any way? Like, is your Java programs more functional today compared to?
So yes and no. I think it depends on the team also. Like we are now big enough that there are teams that get spun up and people work on a service without me being aware of it at times also, because we are now, I think, almost like 150, 160 people in engineering. It's sometimes things just happen, right? And especially, I think we recently sort of came back to office. 2 years or 1.5, 2 years, we were almost remote. So I think a lot of fragmentation could have happened during that time. We are now still figuring out how to sort of do cross pollination more effectively, because when you are remote, in some ways it was great. In some ways it made life difficult.
Right. You talked a lot about simple code, right? How can I write simple code in Java or C#? Like, what advice would you give your teammates about simplicity?
It's okay. Being simple doesn't mean simple code is, again, like, I think it is slightly difficult for me to sort of give a very concrete definition. I think there is a Rich Hickey talk, which I think like he spends 2 hours talking about
Simple
simple
made
versus
easy. Yeah.
But for me, right, like, okay, I think like the very simple definition I can think about is that I should be able to navigate through the code base. I should be able to search for something. I should be able to read top to bottom and understand something instead of like jumping from thing tab to tab and so on. I actually prefer sometimes like having larger functions, but in a top to bottom, there is some narrative in that function versus 10 functions which are one line each, but they can be called in any order. So
Right.
like some of those things, right? Like not doing too much magic. Like Java,
It's about
I think
being
there is a
able
tendency to
to.
do a lot of annotations and put a lot of magic behind certain magic annotations you can put and so on. And doing dependency injection, which has some spooky action at a distance and so on. But it's again like it's sometimes difficult to convince people also about, because this makes your typing. Let's say you're using Java and like having a lot of dependency injection, lot of annotation based logic, makes your life easy when you're typing typing the code. But I would say that typing is just like 10% or maybe not even 10% of your time.
90% is
Most of the
reading.
time is thinking, right?
Yeah.
If you are a fast typer, like I don't think you should be afraid of typing. You should be afraid of not being able to understand what the system does.
I think
But
that's
yeah,
a very good point.
it's sometimes a tough sell, because it is
No, but
not very easy
I
to
guess
explain this.
you need a certain level of experience to be able to
Yes,
appreciate
yes.
this, right?
Yes.
Junior developers especially will not probably understand because they have not contributed to large code bases. And this is also something that I see a lot of engineers today struggling with, because if you give them a take-home task, they will do a good job, but then ask them to contribute to an existing code base with thousands of lines of
Yes.
code,
Yes.
and you will see them struggling right away.
Yeah, it's always easy to say that, okay, let's write this from scratch instead of trying to understand.
Yeah.
Because even if you've written the previous version, you might think that the person who has written it is an idiot because you will not understand it. So it's a tough thing. Like I think only once you get a bit of experience, you realize that the maintenance part of a system is more important than just your initial experience writing it. Because let's say you are building something right now, it might have a life cycle of 5 years, 10 years. It has to be something that people can touch 5 years later also.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. Are there any other functional languages that you are looking at right now or would be interested in checking out?
Me personally, so as a company, I don't think we are looking to definitely adopt a functional language. I think for us, if something, for example, TypeScript came out of nowhere and became a de facto standard, right? I think majority of people doing front end will do TypeScript right now instead of using raw JavaScript. And So if something becomes like a de facto standard or becomes popular enough, I think as a company we will adopt it because it becomes an industry standard. But for my personal sort of experience, I'm actually, again, like, I don't have too much time right now, but I would actually be more interested in going into some low-level languages like Rust and Zig and so on, because I think that is one thing I have not done. As a professional programmer, I have done functional languages, I have done object-oriented languages, I have done whatever procedural code and so on. I have not done a lot of native code. So at least for me personally, I would like to look at some of these languages.
So you mentioned both Rust and Zig, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I really like Zig, by the way. So definitely try it out. Zig is for our viewers, Zig is a modern C, we can say, and Rust is a modern C++. So choose your poison. If you like C, maybe try out Zig. And if you like C++, definitely check out Rust. It's solid. Okay. Last question, Ankit, for you. I think you have some unique experience in this industry. Not only have you built a successful company, a big product used by a lot of people, have also tried out various programming languages and paradigms at the same time, right? So if, let's say, I'm a developer today and I'm thinking about, should I learn any FP language, or I've been taught only Java in college and maybe some C, how should I even start?
I think today functional programming is much more mainstream than, let's say, 5-10 years ago. I think even languages like Java or like a lot of functional concepts have been sort of watered down and incorporated into mainstream languages. So I don't think it is, and like Python, for example, Python and JavaScript are the two most popular languages right now. And both are fairly flexible. Like both are very multi-paradigm. Like you can write functional code in Python or JavaScript, and you can write non-functional code also. So I don't think to get started with, maybe I think it's where the curiosity takes you. Like you can use, if you are familiar with Java or Python, you can still learn about functional approaches and apply them in the language you're familiar with. Or you can choose to go towards learning a language like a Lisp or a Haskell and just understand the different way it works. Because I think, like, first time you try to read some of the source code over there, it will not make sense to you. And it takes a mindset shift for you to suddenly get connected together and understand what's going on. So that's, I think, also one of the great feelings you'll have, that first time it looks like Greek, like you can't understand anything, but like after some point in time, your mindset shifts and you're able to sort of picture what something, a different paradigm looks like, what a different language looks like. So I think as long as you're curious, you can approach it in any way, and as long as you're just consistent and working at it, I'm sure you'll be able to learn. I don't think it is very difficult to learn any of these things. You just need an open mind and being able to devote some time to it. And if you enjoy programming, then I'm sure that devoting time is not a problem. Devoting time to it is not a chore.
Right. Is there are there any books that you can recommend? You talked about SICP, Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs, by Hal Abelson and Gerald J. Sussman. Anything else? Any other book that you can recommend? It doesn't have to be a programming book.
So there is, again, I think, I don't think I read books about F#. Like F#, I just learned using tutorials on the web. There is a great series of articles about F#. I think F# for Fun and Profit. That's the website name. That's a great website. Just read through it. Even if you're not a F# programmer, I think it's a great website to just go through and understand.
Concepts.
Yeah, but nowadays I think like you might even go to ChatGPT and ask it to give a personalized lesson plan for like, and you might get like a very interactive lesson or something. But I think there were some classic books that I had read I think long time back, and I think at that point in time I was more into Lisp as a language. So there was this fun little book called The Little Schemer, which was a great book.
By Daniel Friedman.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a great book if you just want to have a lot of fun, because it's a very joyful book. You can just
mind-blowing book.
And for F Sharp or ML family language, actually I can't recommend any books because I just ended up learning from articles. I think instead of a book, a blog post is often better. Or just reading the language manual or reading the languages docs are often better than looking at a book.
I think reading is better than not reading. It doesn't matter what you read.
Definitely.
So the big challenge today with most developers is that they don't read anything. So, but I think good suggestions, okay, from you. Okay, cool. I think we have some time for audience questions. Are there any questions on YouTube or anywhere else? I think we have answered most of the questions that have been already posted. Tushar had a question. He said that, can you please convince me to use .NET? What can you do to convince me to try out .NET?
Actually, like, definitely keep an open mind. Okay. Let's keep F Sharp aside. Let's say you're doing Java. If you're, let's say, a Java programmer, you should look at C Sharp because whatever C Sharp has is probably like what Java will have 10 years later as a language. C Sharp is a language that has a lot of great concepts by itself. Like it's Java plus all the bad parts of Java simplified and made accessible, I would say. I think it's the language designer for C Sharp is
under Hasgeek.
Yeah. And he's the guy who also ended up going and building TypeScript. It's a very well designed language. Java is a language designed by committee. C Sharp is a language which has one person's vision and built very beautifully. So I think even if you it might be something that you need to just look at, and I think you like it as a language.
And also, I think the .NET platform supports a lot more languages than C Sharp and F Sharp, right? I think even Clojure runs on .NET platform.
Yes.
So we need to think of it more as a platform and not
just like the JVM.
Exactly.
And at least the tooling right now is very ergonomic. You can just start like if you might like create a Clojure project from the command line or a Node project from the command line. You can start and create a C Sharp project from the command line. And if you're using VS Code, you just open a .NET project, automatically you'll get full syntax highlighting, IntelliSense, everything on a Mac or Linux. You don't need to be using Windows anymore.
There is also LSP now. LSP, so almost all languages have LSP.
LSP is another sort of thing that came out of Microsoft.
VS Code.
VS Code and the TypeScript compiler is something that has come out of Microsoft's. Microsoft has a great research division and a programming languages division.
Absolutely.
So don't overlook it. I would say, like it's there is a lot of interesting things inside the .NET ecosystem.
Absolutely, and also I think back in the day, Microsoft was totally anti-Linux, but today they have changed their stance and they have embraced Linux in a big way. You can actually run Linux inside Windows. So I think that's great. Okay. Okay, let's see if we have any other questions.
There is a question from YouTube. Given how the industry has evolved and adopted functional programming, would you still choose F Sharp if you had to build it today?
I personally would not, just because I had a bad experience. But maybe someone who hasn't had the scar tissue might, again, like, I still love the language. I feel like it is my own or our company's experience. I think it's a data point of one. Don't disregard the language or overlook it. It's a great language. It's a great community also. But I would personally not pick it again, just because of the challenges you faced.
How would you, let me ask a follow-up question. If I have to choose a language, let's say I'm starting a company, I've just raised millions of dollars. I have to build a product. How would I go about choosing a programming language for my
product? I think today, if you had a blank slate, I think Python is probably the language you would pick, or Python plus TypeScript maybe, like, because because either you'll have a front end and a back end, or you can just purely be on TypeScript. I think it's these are the most popular languages in the world, and if these are not enough for you, then go on the JVM. I think that's that would be my recommendation, at least.
And on the JVM, you have a lot of options. You have Java, you have Kotlin,
lot of existing libraries. Like JVM has the richest sort of ecosystem of libraries and tools available. Like you'll have something, any particular thing which you need to do, there will be a JVM library for it. So that would, again, I'm very pragmatic as a person. I'm thinking from the point of view of a company founder, or from a point of view of someone taking engineering team and taking tech choices around it. But again, if you are in an early stage and you don't really have constraints, I think any language you are productive in and you can move fast in is more important than thinking about the future of that, because it might be a dead end. Maybe 2 years later you might need to rewrite something, but being able to survive for 2 years and ship products is more important as a startup than having the perfect tech choice or the best architecture or the most scalability. So first thing, actually, before even the language suggestion, if you are comfortable with the tech stack, pick that, because if you are a startup, then most important thing is to be able to be productive and ship things fast.
Right.
The language is not going to change how fast you are going to ship things. Your personal productivity is the most important thing. Outside of that, okay, like if you are familiar with these things, I would say, okay, pick the most mainstream languages.
Right. I think to summarize what you said, just pick what makes you the most productive, because using the programming language is not the goal, right? Ultimately, we are here to build a business.
Yes.
And we need to use whatever tools we can use at our disposal to, get to market fast, right?
So again, like if you are doing something for fun, if you have a fun side project, pick the language you are most interested in at that point in time.
In learning.
If you are building a company, then either pick something that is going to make you fast, or where you can hire people for it.
Right.
And I think there is like for example, this community, functional programming in India, and I think it's important for the community to bring up like obscure languages or not the most mainstream languages and push them to be popular. I think the community has a preference. I think companies will want to use the languages. If something is more mainstream, more people are using it, then there are more odds that a company will pick that as a tech stack instead of something else.
Right. So
I think
education
it's the community
and
that is
evangelism,
yes.
Education and evangelism are also important, right?
Yeah.
Because ultimately we can't build anything sitting in a cave, right? We are not building anything in vacuum here. We, at the end of the day, whether it's engineers or tools or libraries, we do depend on the larger community, right? So it's important that that community exists for any experiment or language choice to be successful. Awesome. Any other questions? We still have 5 to 10 minutes. Just looking.
I actually had a question on hiring people and training them. Did you hire any external trainers or any support to train people?
No, I don't. We didn't have external trainers. I think that is an interesting thought. I didn't even think about that in the past. But yeah, like if there is an ecosystem, if there is a community which is of trainers, or for example, if there is like a clear market leader or someone, like I think Clojure is driven by Cognitech and those communities, right? Like and so on. So if there is like a clear person or team to go and get some training,
champion.
it would be an interesting champion. That's the right word to sort of get a training from. I think that's a very interesting thought.
Also, I think what we have seen, especially in India, Anupam, most trainers are only training mainstream stuff, right? Or anything that is already pretty well known or popular, and there is a large demand because ultimately it's a demand and supply problem. So even if you want to hire a F-sharp programmer, F-sharp trainer, maybe you'll have to bring them from the United States. May not be available.
Yeah, it's interesting because often people have come up with this point that if for a particular functional programming language, if there was like a foundation behind it or a large company supporting it and pushing it and offering training and support, then probably it would be popular.
It's an interesting thought. I think definitely valuable, but
the Ruby community did a great job there.
Yeah.
For example, they created a lot of spaces for people to learn Ruby programming language. There's a lot of evangelism. Those things definitely had a positive impact on the adoption of the Ruby language. From what I
think
remember.
Rust also is a language which has a lot of community oriented here right now.
Yeah, because the Rust users are really passionate. So
yes,
that also matters a lot.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else? Any other question? I see Jaju here. Jaju, do you have any questions for us?
No, thanks, PG. Hi, Ankit. So we covered everything. It was a very
Thanks.
Awesome. Cool then. I think maybe we can wrap it up then, Anupam. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Ankit and BG, for a very insightful talk. I think the parts that I really, I mean, there were lots of takeaways from this, but the part that I really enjoyed was at one point it was said that it's important to be opinionated, and if you enjoy programming, then it's you owe it to yourself to go through all the different paradigms and see which ones you like. I think that's a very good insight into why functional programming, right? If it gives you joy, if it makes programming easier for you, I think that's a very big value add itself.
Absolutely. Awesome.
And what I like, another thing that I really wanted to point out was that FP is becoming more mainstream,
Yes.
And so even if you're not using F#, like C# or Java, they are getting all these features which are inspired by functional programming. So you can still adopt some of those features and still move ahead with it. I think that's also
like think about, let's say, React. React is the most popular front end framework, but it's very functional in nature. It has a lot of functional ideas, and they have the effects system and so on right now, which is pretty complicated if you just approach it from or pretty deep in but it's becoming mainstream because React adopted it, right? And now I keep seeing people trying to use effect system in other frameworks also. So it is, functional programming is much more mainstream now than 10 years ago. And one of the reasons I said that I might not adopt F# as a language if I had to go over and do it again is because many of the ideas have trickled down into mainstream languages. Like C# has great pattern matching. Java also has pattern matching, not to the same level, but it is pleasant and so on. So it becomes, you have better tools now. And a lot of the early functional languages have sort of, the concepts have sort of been brought into more mainstream languages. So that makes it you don't need a pure language if you can take the good parts of functional languages and adopt it in a mainstream language.
Makes sense.
Right, absolutely. I think React has been a big influence with functional programming. Sorry, go ahead.
But it's important to understand where things come from also, because if you just learn something, you might not know why it exists. So at least that's from a personal development point of view, it is also important to understand why a feature was added or why a feature is built.
Totally.
Great. Well, I think let's wrap up this talk. Thanks everyone for attending. If you would like to continue the conversation with the speaker or the topic, please join our other channels, join the Hasgeek community, join the FP India Telegram channel, and you can continue the conversation there. And please attend our upcoming events. Some of them are in person in Delhi and Bangalore. So please look for the information on those also on the website.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks,
Anupam.
Anupam. Thanks, BJ.
Thank you,
It was
Ankit.
a great conversation. Had a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.